Good, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. So let me start off, give you an idea of what I want to cover today. So I want to structure this in essentially 3 parts. First of all, talking about identifying the kinds of choice biases, irrationalities that people tend to have. Then I want to dig a little bit deeper and get into more the psychology of why, trying to understand why people make the choices they do. And then lastly, what I think is the most exciting and interesting part is start to think about how we can apply these insights into helping people make better decisions, how we can nudge them to make choices that meet their long-term goals, okay? So this is a mix a little bit of economics and psychology. This is part of my background is interdisciplinary, so we're going to be covering these topics there. With that being said, please feel free to interrupt with questions or comments at any time. I would encourage that. My friends tell me occasionally I'm more interesting if I'm provoked. So with that being said, please feel free to jump in. Good? Okay. So let me start off with a really simple decision problem. Very simple gamble. 2 options here. Option A, nothing happens. You don't gain anything, you don't lose anything. But if you choose option B, then I flip a perfectly fair coin. If it comes up heads, I give you a certain amount of money. If it comes up tails, you lose $100. You have to give me money, all right? So the question then is, if I change this value of X, when would I start to entice some of you to take this particular risky option? All right? So let me put in a concrete value there. I offer this gamble here. A gain of 95 or a loss of 100, and it's a 50-50 chance. Any takers in the room? Yeah. No? No one? Okay. Right, so this is staggeringly unpopular here. Why is that? No one wants this. Bad odds, 50-50, that's not bad. Yeah, the returns aren't 50-50, right? The losses here are larger than the gains. So then if I change the gains just a little bit, so now the gains are 105, the losses are still 100, same odds, I should expect all the hands in the room to go up, right? No, okay. So these kinds of experiments have been done extensively in experimental economics, looking at people's preferences and starting to say, okay, well, let's up that value. When will most people be interested in taking this gamble? One shot. And if these amounts strike you as trivial, imagine adding 3 zeros behind it. Nice. Right? I don't have the budget to do this yet. But that could give you some feel of what this is like, right? So, like I was saying, experiments have been done going through these different values. And what's interesting is that you really have to get that gain number up substantially. In fact, you have to get it up to about 220 or so before most people are willing to take this gamble. So this is a little bit surprising. This isn't just risk aversion, people not liking the uncertainty of the gamble. This is something bigger. This is called loss aversion. And it's this idea, this deep idea, that losses feel bigger than gains. Losses are more painful than gains are pleasurable, holding the magnitudes constant. All right? That's the idea. So let's roll this idea up. So let's start to think about how that might manifest itself in a little bit more complicated situations. Imagine a different kind of gamble here. I flip a fair coin. If it comes up heads, I pay you $2,000. But if it comes up tails, you pay me $500. Right? I'm not doing this for real. I would lose a lot of money if I did this. But we don't do this just once. We do this 5 times. And you have to commit all 5 times. No running away halfway through. You have to commit to doing that, right? So how many people here would take this? Yeah, right? Okay, a little bit of background in finance or economics, you see very quickly, this is pretty good. You have over an 80% chance of gaining money, and you could gain quite a bit. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed. There's a 3% chance that you could still lose. You could be staggeringly unlucky and get 3 losses or 5 losses in a row, and so you'd lose. But that's very, very unlikely. What's interesting is when these experiments, when this kind of thing is offered to people, about 20% of people still won't take this, right? That by itself is surprising. And I think that highlights just the power of loss aversion. And what's driving it, when you ask these people, wait, why wouldn't you do that? What they point out is that loss. There's a chance that they could lose $2,500. And I think this highlights the sensitivity many people have to losses. Now that by itself is a challenge to neoclassic economics, but here's what really gets economists in a tizzy. So imagine I show you the exact same gamble in 2 different ways. The way on the left here is disaggregated. It's broken apart into 5 different gambles, right? But you have to commit to all 5. And so there's 2 different ways of showing it here. One is disaggregated, separated into different parts, and on the right is the aggregated part, shown all together, right? Same mathematics behind it, exactly the same expected value. What's interesting is that people like the aggregated form, the one on the right, quite a bit more than the one on the left. If you break it out into lots of little pieces, separate the gambles out, people like it less. And again, this is loss aversion. There's a chance to see more losses. People don't like that, and they avoid that particular gamble. All right? So this concept of loss aversion has been highlighted as one of the major contributions. This is quoting Kahneman here, talking about what psychology has been able to give to economics, and it's this idea, how losses loom larger than gains. So this is what I do a lot of, thinking about thinking. This is decision science and applied behavioral science. And we often take these complicated real-world problems and try and distill them down into very simple kinds of things, like these simple gambles I'm showing you here. Not because we're degenerate gamblers. We're not. What I'm interested in is some sort of test tube, which can highlight the precise features that are informing a person's decision and start to understand the mechanisms of why they're making the choices they do. So part of what we do in research is striving to develop these decision models that are tractable, that we can wrap our brains around, but still informative to be able to help people make better decisions. And a lot of what we do, some of the most exciting parts of our work is in taking these really simple models and then scaling those back up to the complex, hairy, real world. This is necessary because when you look at how neoclassic economics and traditional finance set up how people make decisions, they start with this very simplified model that markets are populated by decision agents who are rational and maximize their expected utility. Now, this is a peculiar creature, right? This rational decision maker responds consistently to incentives, and it makes appropriate trade-offs as they try and reach their goals. The rational people think both about the present and the future and the likely consequences of their choices, and they balance all of that, adjudicate it in such a way they maximize the probability of maximizing their material well-being. So do you think this is a good model of how people make decisions? Is this a good model of how your clients make decisions? Right? So what behavioral finance is trying to do is develop more human models that give us some better insight into how real people think and make trade-offs and make decisions. And this isn't to imply that people are stupid. That's not what my point is here. It's that people are limited in how much attention they can focus on at a problem, limited in how much willpower they have to bring to bear, limited in how their memory works, and limited in their abstract reasoning ability. Okay? All right. So let's go over a couple different ways in which we can try and help people make better decisions. I mean, because part of the goal is to try and make people act more rationally. And I'm telling you here about this dual model approach. So if you look at economics, it says just make sure you get the incentives right. If there's enough incentives, people will make good decisions and they'll at least approximate rationality. However, when you look at financial decision making, these are some of the highest consequence decisions people make in their whole lives. And this is an area in which people often persistently make bad choices and lots of mistakes. So I don't think incentives here is going to be an answer. What about education? This idea of financial literacy? I'm sure you've all heard of this idea. Right? I'm very skeptical about this as an approach. And when you look at the literature, the effectiveness of this, it turns out to be rather stark in its conclusions. So looking at over 200 different studies where financial literacy was used to try and improve people's decision making, the consensus conclusion is that there was almost no effect whatsoever. Doesn't seem to help. All right? So it's not going to be like education here is something where we can just make people more rational. And I think part of the reason is because this is fighting uphill. It's like, to use a metaphor, it's like trying to educate someone not to see a visual illusion. So let me just give you a really very simple principle of your perception, right? Let me educate you just slightly. If something isn't moving, don't perceive it as moving. That seems straightforward, right? Uncontroversial? Okay, let me show you a picture. Look at the points in the middle of the circles. Now tell me, do you see the rings moving more clockwise or more anti-clockwise, right? Just by show of hands to make sure you don't feel alone, how many people see motion here? See motion. Okay, lots of people do here. All right, what's happening right now is your brain is having a furious argument with itself, and you're losing, right? So the visual cortex back here is really good at organizing visual information, at detecting patterns, and it's processing a lot of this information, doing so very quickly. This image is designed to overwhelm it a little bit, to trip it up. And it's communicating that, sending signals to the prefrontal cortex up here, and this part of your brain knows better. This is a static JPEG. I'm telling you, it's not moving. You believe me, it's not moving. And you look at it again, and you see it moving, right? So I could stand up here and just yell at you for some period of time, like, don't see it moving. Just don't see it moving, right? And that's not going to work. And I think educating away choice biases is in a similar vein. It's like trying to convince someone not to see a visual illusion. In part because our brains are hardwired to understand stimuli in a particular context. And there are some contexts that trip up normal processes. This is one. That's why visual illusions are useful, because they show where there's sometimes a mismatch between what we expect and what's really there. But there are lots of other areas in which our brains are not well adapted, in which we're hardwired to make kinds of mistakes. And modern capital markets, with all of the variance, the randomness, is another context where our brains are simply not well adapted. Okay, let me show you another one, the power of context here. So this shows you a nice illustration. There's a checkerboard there. One of the boxes is labeled A, the other is labeled B. Let's have a little quiz, right? Which square is darker? Be bold, write down an answer. A or B? A. Well, you don't have to share it with the class. Write down an answer. Everyone can perceive this. Which square do you think is darker? So I heard lots of people shout out A. Let me make this a little bit simpler for you. Let me try and take away part of the picture, and let me put these things right next to each other so you can make a better comparison. And again, if you want to see my slides afterward to make sure I'm not lying to you, I'm happy to show you. There's no deception here. Your brain is doing this to you. I'm not doing this to you. So who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Yeah, you're not sure yet, right? Part of the reason to use this illustration is to show how highly sensitive our brains are to context and how different contexts can radically change what people perceive. I'll come back to this motif later. All right. Obviously, we have one brain. That's no dispute there. But the emerges from cognitive science is this idea that there are two minds. And so one of these minds is effortful, is slow. This is the part of your brain you engage when you're thinking hard about something. This is the part of your mind that's closer to rational when you try. Right? But there's another mind in there. And this one is emotive, fast, intuitive, quick. You don't have to try hard for this part of the mind. It just emerges quickly. Sometimes these things line up. They give you the same answers. Sometimes not so. All right. I used to be a university professor. Some habits die hard. Let's have a pop quiz. I'm serious. So you have a piece of paper, right? And you have a pen to write on. This will only take a couple minutes. Or actually, it'll take less than a minute. There's only 3 questions. I'm not going to grade it. I'm not going to call anyone out or embarrass anyone, but do take it seriously. And remember, this does reflect, to some extent, your value as a person. Ready? All right. Here we go. Question 1. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Go ahead and write down your answer. Number 2. It takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets. How long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Go ahead and write down your answer, please. All right, number 3. In a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? All right, write down your answer, please. So you should have 3 answers written down in front of you? Yes? Okay. This quiz is designed because there are certain answers that very quickly, intuitively, emotively come to mind that are precisely wrong. These are the wrong answers. When people get the quiz wrong, This is how they get it wrong. Okay? These are the right answers in green. Now, there are several things about this quiz. It's really nice as a highlight. First of all, this is not a visual illusion. This is a cognitive illusion. This is designed to highlight the tension between different systems of your brain, two minds battling it out. And some people mediate that battle better than others. Okay? You can compute your score. Just add up the number of correct answers you got. You should score between 0 and 3. Right. That score turns out to correlate to a lot of interesting things. Patience is one of them. People who are less likely to panic sell score higher on this. People who make more money, other sorts of life outcomes. So part of successful decision making is being able to mediate between these two parts of the mind, these two minds, and to be able to use calmer, more collected thoughts to try and rein in more emotive thoughts. Okay? Hopefully I didn't bruise any egos too much here. All right, so there are limitations in how rational people are and how rational we can make them. So let's start to think seriously about how we can still help people make better decisions, even though we know that they have these two minds at work. So there's this notion, this idea called choice architecture, where we can start to take seriously and think in a way to try and design choice contexts in such a way to help people still make good decisions, even though we know they're not perfectly rational. So we don't design the decision context assuming that they're always perfectly rational. We start to think about, well, there's other factors at work here. The goal is to still help people make good choices. And in many ways, this can act as a partial solution to the behavioral biases we've talked a lot about and that have come out of behavioral sciences in the last 20 years or so. And I would argue that this is one of the areas of great future value that financial advisors can offer to their clients, is being able to think about how to be good choice architects for them. What I want to do next is give you lots of examples of this, to give you some takeaways of what this is, choice architecture in practice. So here's a very well-known example. How do you get people to eat better? So there's a public health crisis in the United States of obesity and diabetes. Maybe if we just tell people to eat better, that'll make things work better, right? It's not working. So one intervention has been in cafeterias to try and put the healthy food first and to put it in the easiest to reach spots. And that has an effect. That changes how people choose to eat based on structuring the environment like this. And this is an example of a nudge, a very simple nudge that it plays off of the availability heuristic people use and uses that to help them make better choices. So as you start to think about this, I mean, obviously you're not in food choice, but you can start to think about what's the principle at work here. Well, think about designing a choice environment and putting the largest consequences choices first, and make sure that it's easy for people to choose the smart option. All right, let me give you some other examples. So one of the common ways in which decisions are structured for people is you just give them all the options. You put all the options on the table, give them the information, let them figure it out. But an idea that's come through is this notion of defaults. And this turns out to be one of the most powerful ways to be able to nudge people to choose better. So rather than just give people all the options, they still have the options, but you make one of them, the one that's the best or the least bad, you make that the default, such that if they don't do anything, that's what they will have de facto chosen. They, of course, can change this. They still have every bit of freedom to change it that they did before, but you've structured it in such a way to kind of nudge them towards one of these options. So the seminal studies in this area have looked in the area of organ donation. So there's a natural experiment that emerges because different countries have a different policy in terms of whether people are opted in or opted out of being organ donors. And countries that have the default option of in are much more likely to have higher donation rates. Countries that don't have much, much lower donation rates. Now, of course, anyone can go in and change this. All you do is fill out a little card and sign it, and you can become a donor or not. And so everyone still has the freedom, but it's this policy, what the default is, that has a huge effect on whether or not people end up being organ donors. And this has serious consequences. In the United States, about 25 people die every day while waiting on organ donation lists. In Australia, it's about 1 to 2 people a week. Okay? That could be mitigated. We could change that tomorrow by changing the defaults. In the financial realm, you can use defaults to change how much people save. So in the United States, savings is not compulsory. However, if the default is for there to be a positive savings rate, this changes how much people save. You can get them to partake in savings plans and also contribute more. And that has a huge effect in their accumulated wealth. right now, millennials are the first generation in a long time to be better off than their peers or than those before them. And it's not because they're smarter or better educated or richer. None of those things are true. It's because of these kinds of policies. Because of these policies, default savings rates are high. More people are saving. So I think the takeaway from this is that you start to empower yourself and think like a choice architect. How can you structure the choice situation to help people make better choices? And defaults are a very powerful way to do this. You can also add additional social reinforcement along the lines of most people in your situation choose option X and are quite happy with it. And that's very effective at nudging people as well. If you look at standard economic theory, there's this balance between supply and demand, and equilibria emerge. It's beautiful mathematically and almost entirely inaccurate describing how the world works. But out of that is this idea that people, their preferences are largely stable over time. And that's just not true. So as you start to think about designing choice interventions or asking people different questions, you want to start to think about which mind you want to talk to. And you want to try and reach people when they're most ready to take the opportunity you're presenting. So one set of experiments out of this has to do with when people are willing to click on and take action based on some sort of email they receive. This comes out of a firm named Hello Wallet. So they did lots of interesting experiments in behavioral science and were acquired by Morningstar about 4 years ago. And the question was, when should we send out these emails when we need people to click on this link and do something? So there was debate behind the scenes. I think Thursday's better. No, people will do it by Friday, and so on and so on. And these armchair debates are largely useless. But one of the great things about this firm is that they had this spirit of experimentation. And so rather than debate it, they just set up an experiment. And so they gave emails, sent out emails on lots of different days of the week and lots of different times, and then saw what worked. And let me show you some of the highlights of the results here. So sending an email and getting people to do anything, sending it after hours, turns out to be not very effective. The click rates are very low, only about 1.6%. Monday morning was better. So during work hours, about 10:30 in the morning, people were much more likely to click on it, but still not as good as Tuesday. And the thinking here is that Monday, people are preoccupied putting out fires that might have arose over the weekend, whereas Tuesday, they might have more attention, more space in their minds to start to think about what you're asking them to do. Okay? So the takeaway here is think about your interventions and think about timing them so that you're talking to the right mind, the mind that can make the choice you need it to make. The takeaway from this is don't send all of your emails at 10:30 on Tuesday, right? If everyone does that, there'll be a crowding out. Part of the reason here is just start to think ahead a little bit about when the most effective timing is. And again, this idea of experimentation. People are always changing and moving, and being able to do experiments to be able to update policies internally is quite valuable. All right, so this is research that's closer. This is research I did with other people at Morningstar. So we've been interested a lot in goal-centric investment and goal planning. And so how do you ask people their goals? How do you find out what people's goals are? Well, if you think people are perfectly rational, you just ask them. Just ask them this question, and off the top of their head, they'll tell you, here's what my goals are, right? But it turns out that for many people, that doesn't work very well. For about a quarter of people, what they tell you is their overarching main financial goal is unreliable. They'll tell it to you, but they'll actually very quickly change their mind on that. And if you ask for their top 3 goals, about 75% of people change one of those. So people will give you an answer to that question, but it's not really a good one. So we started to think more seriously about how could we use some sort of intervention to get people's goals that would give us more reliable, better insight into what really motivated them over the long term. And so this is a paper, and there'll be a link sent out in the next couple days that'll give you access to this. And here's, at the end of it, we wanted to be very concrete. So not just doing research, but actually to make a tool that we could put in your hands that is a process to help people elicit their goals. So the first step of this process is just asking people. Just starting to get them to think, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Why are you investing? And literally, they do this in pencil. In fact, this sheet is probably not even shown to the advisor. It's just them thinking themselves about this. And then the middle step, this is where it's the most effective, is there's this checklist, this master list of these are very common goals people have when investing. Look through that list, mark off things on here that really resonate with you, that you're really motivated by, and scratch off stuff you don't care about. Okay, this is other people. This isn't you. This is just, what do you think? And then you get back and you say, okay, now let's write down your goals. And that gives a much more reliable estimate, insight into what people are really motivated by. Only takes a couple minutes too. Okay, so this highlights the use of checklists. Checklists can be extremely effective in helping people think about things. And in part what we're doing here is not taxing their memory. Most people's attention day to day is on things like, where's my cell phone? What do I need to get at the market, right? They don't keep on the top of their heads, what is my 30-year overarching financial goal? It's a matter of two minds. Which mind do you want to talk to? This process gives that other mind a chance to surface. All right, so this is what I'm sure you've seen. You want people to stay the course during times of volatility. How do you accomplish that? You just tell them, stay the course. That should be sufficient, right? Yeah, it's not. So let's start to think about how we would design feedback for people to help them do this, help them accomplish this. So let's start to frame the choice in the proper time scope. We'll start to use context to help people make good long-term decisions. So back to this simple gamble I showed you at the beginning, that by slicing up results into narrower parts, there's more of a chance to see losses. And we know that people are hypersensitive to losses. The more often that they can look, the more often they can see losses. And we know from this dual process model that people really, really don't like losses. And when they see losses, they get nervous. When they get nervous, they get scared. And when people get scared, they do dumb things, right? So imagine you have these different portfolios. So I have 5 different investors here, and they're holding exactly the same portfolio, which is just the S&P 500. The only difference between these people is how often they go in and look at the performance of their portfolio. The one on the top, she's examining at the end of every day. Next is weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. And then we highlight the losses. How often will this person see a loss? And the more often you look, the more losses you see. That's just how the mathematics of large numbers work. In fact, if you look every day, you'll see losses about 46% of the time. But if you check in yearly, you'll only see losses between about 25 and 30% of the time. And it's the exact same portfolio. It's just a matter of how it's sliced up in time. So by looking more often, an investor can make themselves less happy. And this is a great example of where ignorance can in fact be bliss, especially when it comes to enduring market volatility. And research shows that people who examine their portfolios more often are less happy. And they also perform worse, in a sense because they're tempted to fiddle with, change their portfolio asset allocations based on unwise motivations or emotional reasons. So this point has been highlighted by others. So Kahneman came and visited us last year, Morningstar Investment Conference, and he was talking about his contributions over the last decades, and in particular loss aversion. And this idea, he says that when investors see something bad happen, they may want to change direction, change advisors, change and go do something else. This is the biggest danger to their financial health. So here's how we typically show portfolio performance to people. And I'll go through this a little quickly. So through the lens of behavioral scientists, you look at this and say, well, this is designed for a very rational, very cold mind. The first number, actually, that's shown up here is what the NASDAQ did. And the time frame for this is daily, right? Moreover, lots of different constituent parts of the portfolio are shown, and losses are highlighted in nice, big, bright red ink, right? In some ways, this is a feedback process that's designed to make some people freak out. So one of the research projects we had, which is very much a blue sky project, is starting to think about how would we represent portfolio performance in a way that didn't induce people to make bad decisions. So this comes out of a research project we've called goals-based risk, thinking about how could we represent portfolio performance. So here, where you can direct people's attention, the first number they see, big number, is what's the probability of you reaching your financial goals? A lot of people just want to check and find out, am I on track? Yes, good. Several other features. We show the value of contributions. This is one of the largest drivers of success, and so we will make sure that's highlighted. And we also use a time horizon that's proper. We are a long-term investment shop. We believe in the value of long-term investing. Why not reiterate that to people? The x-axis here is 30 years. Here, dear investor, you are 2 years into a 30-year journey. Let me show you where you are. And that helps contextualize the volatility they see. Yes, there's talking heads on TV who are screaming and yelling, but let's look at what that is within the context of what we're trying to accomplish here. So back to this visual illusion. Remember controlling the context? This is a representation that tries to take the context and use it in such a way to focus people's attention on what really matters. And part of this is based on serious academic research. This is one of the things I do as well. So this is published in the Journal on Psychology, and you know this is serious research because in the first paragraph we have an equation. It has Greek in it, right? And if that wasn't enough, by page 5 we're doing these sorts of things, which you can see on the right there. It took 20 pages for us to say what we're trying to say, but in the end, this is the message. This is what the conclusion of this research is that loss aversion, although serious, this can be overcome. You can overcome people's loss aversion by changing what they pay attention to. Okay, so choice architecture is this approach where we start to think about designing for two minds, recognizing that people have these different ways of approaching the world. We want to try and contextualize information and nudge people to make better choices, make it simple, make it easy, help inoculate people to normal volatility, helping people understand this is normal, this is what we expect, and focusing on long-term goals. So this is what I wanted to present to you today. So going over this identification, giving you some language to talk about loss aversion, what that is, being able to identify it, being able to understand a little bit of where this comes from, and maybe you can start to see different instantiations of this yourself, and that should give you a warning. People are hypersensitive to this. And then starting to think about ways we can apply these insights to help people make better decisions, nudge them for making better choices. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan at all after his session? Nothing? I'm conscious of time too, so Ryan will be around afterwards. Please do look out for him. You'd love to, he's pretty passionate about the stuff, to state the obvious. Yeah. So you'd love to engage with you. But thank you, Ryan. That was sensational.
Thank you.
Any advice in this video is general advice prepared by Morningstar without reference to your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider the advice in light of these matters and any relevant product disclosure statement before making any decision to invest. To obtain advice for your own situation, contact a financial advisor.